Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is offer his heart, knowing it might get broken. Sometimes the wisest thing a woman can do is see the goodness everyone else overlooks. In a frontier town where everyone knew everyone's business, mountain man Jacob Cole walked into the general store and proposed to a young woman who laughed in his face. Her widowed mother stood nearby and watched the whole thing unfold. What she did next stunned the entire town and changed two lives forever. How does a refined widow and a rough mountain man build something real when the whole world says it can't work? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cedar Falls sat tucked in a valley where the mountains met the high plains, a settlement born from the silver strike of 1869 and sustained by the trappers, miners, and farmers who called it home. By 1876, the town had grown respectable, with a main street of wooden buildings that included a general store, a church, a blacksmith shop, and a saloon that pretended to be a hotel. The people of Cedar Falls knew each other's business, the way they knew the changing seasons, and they held opinions about their neighbors with the same certainty they held about the weather. Jacob Cole had lived in the mountains above Cedar Falls for near about 12 years, coming down only when necessity demanded. He was a man shaped by solitude and hard work, his face weathered like old leather, his hands scarred from traps and knives and the general violence of survival. He stood tall but not imposing, broad-shouldered in the way of men who carry their own weight and then some. His hair, dark as creek water at night, hung past his collar, and his beard grew thick when winter came on. Most folks in town knew him by sight, but not by familiarity. He sold his furs, bought his supplies, and disappeared back into the high country where he kept a cabin that few had ever seen. But Jacob was not unkind, nor was he crude in the way some mountain men could be. He spoke when spoken to, paid his debts, and never caused trouble. The children of Cedar Falls regarded him with a mixture of fear and fascination, this quiet giant who smelled of pine smoke and leather. The men respected him because he worked honest and asked nothing of anyone. The women mostly ignored him, seeing only his rough exterior and assuming nothing of substance lay beneath. Catherine Hartwell was different from most women in Cedar Falls, though she would never have said so herself. She had come to the territory 15 years prior as the bride of Thomas Hartwell, a man 20 years her senior who had made his fortune in silver and timber. Thomas had been good to her, in his way. He provided well, treated her with respect, and gave her a daughter before a heart seizure took him 4 years back. Catherine had mourned him honestly, for he had been decent, and she had grown fond of him, though theirs had never been a love match in the truest sense. Now 42 years old, Catherine managed the general store that Thomas had built. She had a head for figures and a steady hand with accounts, and she knew how to deal with suppliers and customers alike. Her hair, once golden, had faded to a soft honey color threaded with silver. She wore it pinned up in a simple style that suggested practicality rather than vanity. Her face showed the years, but wore them well, with fine lines at her eyes that deepened when she smiled. She dressed plainly but with care, in good fabric that lasted, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. Catherine's daughter Miranda had turned 19 that spring, and she was beautiful in the way that caused men to stumble over their words and women to purse their lips. She had inherited her father's striking features and her mother's grace, but she had also inherited something else, something neither parent had quite intended. Miranda believed deeply in the importance of social standing, in marrying well, in elevating oneself above the common dust of frontier life. She dreamed of San Francisco or Denver, of fine dresses and refined society. She helped her mother in the store, but did so grudgingly, as if the work were beneath her station. Catherine watched her daughter with a mixture of love and concern. She recognized in Miranda the same yearnings she herself had once felt, the same desire to escape ordinariness. But Catherine had learned, through years and loss, that refinement of character mattered more than refinement of circumstance. She had tried to teach Miranda this, but the girl would not hear it. Miranda wanted wealth and status, and she pursued the few eligible bachelors in Cedar Falls and the surrounding territory with single-minded determination. The general store stood at the heart of Cedar Falls, both literally and figuratively. It was here that news spread, gossip flourished, and the social hierarchy of the town revealed itself in 1,000 small interactions. Catherine presided over this domain with fairness and tact, extending credit when she could, refusing it gently when she could not. She knew every family's circumstances, every secret hardship, and she kept these confidences close. Jacob Cole had been coming to the store for 12 years, but it was only in the past year that Catherine had truly begun to notice him. She observed the way he always stepped aside to let others pass first. She saw how he spoke quietly to avoid startling folks. She noticed that he never haggled over prices, though she knew his trapping income varied with the seasons. Once, she had seen him give his last coin to a child who had dropped her penny in the mud, telling the girl to buy herself a peppermint stick. He had done it when he thought no one was watching. Catherine had also noticed, with something like gentle amusement, that Jacob's visits had become more frequent in recent months. He lingered by the counter longer than necessary. His eyes followed Miranda when she moved through the store, though he always looked away quickly if anyone glanced at him. Catherine understood what was happening. She had seen it before, this phenomenon of a lonely man falling for a pretty face, mistaking beauty for compatibility, confusing desire with understanding. She felt sorry for Jacob because she could see what he could not. Miranda barely registered his existence. When she did notice him, it was only to wrinkle her nose slightly at the smell of wood smoke and buckskin, to step back from his rough presence. Miranda was waiting for someone else entirely, someone from her fantasies of a better life. The town's social structure revealed itself most clearly on Sundays, when everyone gathered for church services. The families of means sat in the front pews, the merchants and skilled tradesmen occupied the middle. The laborers, drifters, and questionable characters filled the back or stood outside. Jacob, on the rare occasions he attended, stood in the very last row, hat in his hands, listening to sermons about grace and redemption. Catherine sat in the third pew with Miranda, who spent the entire service scanning the congregation for potential suitors. It was after one such Sunday service in late spring that Catherine had overheard a conversation between two of the town's matrons. They were discussing Jacob Cole, speculating about his age, his prospects, his fitness for civilized society. One of them declared him beyond redemption, too set in his ways, too rough for any decent woman. The other agreed, adding that some men were simply meant to live alone, that it was probably for the best. Catherine had said nothing, but the conversation troubled her. She found herself thinking about loneliness, about the assumptions people made based on appearances, about the way society decided who was worthy and who was not. She thought about her own life, the years stretching ahead of her, the quiet evenings in the rooms above the store, the careful maintenance of respectability that brought her no real joy. She did not yet know that her life was about to change, that a decision made in a moment of clarity would alter everything. She only knew that something in her had shifted, some certainty had crumbled, and in its place had grown a question she could not quite articulate. In his cabin high above Cedar Falls, Jacob Cole sat before his fire on those spring evenings and thought about Miranda Hartwell. He had convinced himself over the long winter that she was the one, that her beauty reflected some inner quality he could not quite name, but desperately wanted to believe in. He had saved his money, 3 months' worth of trapping income, and commissioned a ring from the town's jeweler. It was simple, just a thin band of gold, but it represented everything he had to offer. He planned his proposal with the care of a man who had little experience with such things, and understood that he would likely have only one chance to get it right. He did not allow himself to imagine rejection. He told himself that persistence and sincerity would be enough, that if he could just find the right words, Miranda would see past his rough exterior to the heart beneath. He was wrong about many things, but he was not wrong about the existence of that heart, nor about its capacity to hope against all evidence to the contrary. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was for the scene to unfold, for courage and folly to collide, and for wisdom to arrive from the most unexpected quarter. The Saturday morning arrived warm and clear, with the kind of light that made the dust motes visible in the air and turned the wooden buildings of Cedar Falls golden. The general store opened at 8 o'clock, and by half past the hour it was already busy with the week's trade. Farmers came in with their wives to purchase supplies. Miners stopped by for tobacco and coffee. Women gathered near the fabric display, touching the bolts of cloth and discussing patterns for summer dresses. Miranda stood behind the counter that morning, her mood as dark as the day was bright. The mail coach had arrived the evening before, and with it had come a letter she had been awaiting for 3 weeks. She had been corresponding with a gentleman in Boston, the nephew of a man who had once done business with her father. The correspondence had been Miranda's initiative, carefully crafted letters in which she presented herself as refined, educated, and worthy of consideration. She had allowed herself to hope, to dream of an offer that would take her away from Cedar Falls and into the life she believed she deserved. The letter had been brief and polite. The gentleman thanked her for her correspondence, but regretted to inform her that he had recently become engaged to a young woman of his acquaintance in Boston. He wished Miranda well in all her future endeavors. The rejection stung not merely because it dashed her hopes, but because it forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. She was 19 years old, living in a frontier town with limited prospects, and the world she longed for seemed to be slipping further away with each passing year. Her mother had tried to comfort her the night before, but Miranda would not be comforted. She felt the injustice of her situation keenly. She was beautiful. She was the daughter of a successful man. She deserved better than what Cedar Falls could offer. The fact that her father's fortune had been modest, that the store provided a living but not wealth, that her own contributions to that living were essential rather than ornamental, these realities did not fit into Miranda's vision of herself. So she stood behind the counter that Saturday morning with a hard set to her jaw and a sharpness in her eyes, serving customers with mechanical efficiency and responding to pleasantries with the bare minimum of courtesy. Catherine watched her daughter with concern, but said nothing. She knew Miranda needed time to work through her disappointment, and she hoped that eventually the girl would come to see that happiness did not depend on geography or social status. Jacob Cole entered the store at 10:30. He had bathed in the creek that morning, scrubbing himself with lye soap until his skin was red. He had trimmed his beard as best he could without a proper mirror, and he wore his cleanest shirt, the one he saved for rare occasions. The ring was in his pocket, wrapped in a piece of soft leather. His heart hammered in his chest as he stepped through the door, and his palms were damp despite the morning's cold water. The store was crowded, which he had not anticipated. He had imagined speaking to Miranda in relative privacy, perhaps when the store was quiet in the late afternoon. But he had come down from the mountain with his resolve firm, and he feared that if he waited, his courage might fail him. He stood just inside the doorway for a long moment, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior, his mind racing through the words he had rehearsed. Catherine saw him first. She was arranging canned goods on a shelf near the back of the store, and when she glanced toward the door, she recognized immediately that something was different about Jacob Cole. He wore the look of a man about to do something momentous, something that required every ounce of his determination. She felt a sudden clutch of premonition, a sense that whatever was about to happen would not end well. Jacob moved through the store slowly, weaving between the other customers, his eyes fixed on Miranda at the counter. She was serving Mrs. Henderson, measuring out sugar from the barrel and pouring it into a paper sack. She did not look up as Jacob approached. He waited, standing to one side, his hat in his hands, the ring a small weight in his pocket. When Mrs. Henderson had paid and moved away, Miranda finally looked at Jacob. Her expression was one of impatient inquiry. Nothing more. She saw a customer, a man who needed serving so she could move on to the next task. "Yes," she said. The single word carried no warmth. Jacob opened his mouth to speak, but his throat had gone dry. He swallowed hard, tried again. "Miss Miranda," he said, his voice rough. "I wonder if I might have a word with you." Miranda glanced around the store, at the other customers, at her mother in the back. "I'm working," she said. "If you need supplies, I can help you with that." "It's not about supplies," Jacob said. He could feel the eyes of others on him now, could sense the attention of the room shifting in his direction. "It's a personal matter." Miranda's expression sharpened with irritation. "This is hardly the time or place for personal matters, Mr. Cole." But Jacob had come too far to turn back now. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket and withdrew the small leather-wrapped bundle. He unfolded it carefully, revealing the simple gold band. The ring caught the light, glinting softly. "Miss Miranda," he said, and his voice carried now through the store, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "I know I'm not much to look at, and I know I don't have fine words or fancy ways. But I'm an honest man, and I work hard, and I could provide for you. I have a cabin in the high country, and I could build onto it, make it proper for a wife. I've been thinking on this all winter, and I've come to believe that you're the one I'm meant to share my life with." The store had gone quiet. Every eye was on Jacob and Miranda now. Catherine had moved closer, drawn by some instinct she could not name. She stood near enough to see the expression on her daughter's face change from irritation to disbelief, to something harder, something cruel. "I'm asking if you'll marry me," Jacob said, and he held out the ring with a hand that shook, despite his best efforts to steady it. For a long moment Miranda simply stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile began to form on her lips. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had been offered an absurdity, who could not quite believe what she was hearing. "You're asking me to marry you?" she said, and her voice rose slightly, carrying to every corner of the store. "You're asking me to leave this town, such as it is, to go live in some cabin in the mountains with you?" Jacob's face had begun to flush. He could hear the mockery in her tone, could see the contempt in her eyes. "I know it's not much," he said, "but I would take care of you. I would be good to you." Miranda's smile widened, and then she laughed. It was not a polite laugh, not a gentle refusal. It was loud and sharp and full of genuine amusement at the ridiculousness of what she had just heard. Several of the other customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "You must be joking," Miranda said, still laughing. "Do you really think I would marry you? Do you have any idea how presumptuous this is? Look at yourself, Mr. Cole. Look at what you are and what I am. Did you honestly believe I would say yes to this?" The laughter died to giggles, then to a smile that held nothing but derision. "I appreciate the offer, truly I do. It's quite the most entertaining thing that's happened to me all week. But no, Mr. Cole, I will not marry you. I will not now, nor ever." Jacob stood frozen, the ring still extended in his hand. His face had gone from red to pale, the color draining away as the full weight of humiliation settled over him. Around the store, people averted their eyes, suddenly finding great interest in the merchandise before them. The silence was heavy with shared discomfort, with the knowledge that they had all witnessed something private being made devastatingly public. Catherine felt the moment as a physical pain in her chest. She saw the hurt in Jacob's eyes, the way his shoulders had begun to curve inward as if to protect himself from further blows. She saw her daughter's face, flushed with mean triumph, enjoying the power of her rejection. And in that instant, Catherine saw clearly what her daughter had become, what she herself had failed to prevent. She saw the cruelty, the vanity, the inability to recognize goodness when it stood before her with an open heart. She also saw Jacob Cole, truly saw him, perhaps for the first time. She saw not the rough exterior, not the weathered face and scarred hands, but the man beneath. She saw his loneliness, his courage in making himself vulnerable, his honest desire for connection. She saw a man who had saved for months to buy a ring, who had scrubbed himself clean and rehearsed his words, and walked into town knowing he might be refused, but hoping he might be accepted. She saw a good man being destroyed by casual cruelty, and something in her rebelled against it with a force that surprised her. Jacob had begun to fold the ring back into its leather wrapping. His movements were slow, mechanical, the movements of a man who was trying very hard to maintain his dignity in an impossible situation. He did not look at Miranda anymore. He was preparing to turn, to walk out of the store and out of their lives, carrying his shame back to the mountains where he could nurse it in private. "Wait," Catherine said. The word cut through the silence like a bell. Every head turned toward her. Jacob froze, his hand halfway to his pocket. Miranda's smile faltered. Catherine walked forward, moving through the crowded store with deliberate grace. She did not look at the other customers, did not acknowledge the stares. She walked directly to Jacob Cole and stopped before him, close enough that she could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was steady, calm, clear. "You have made an offer of marriage. It was a sincere offer, made honestly and with respect. It deserves a sincere answer." She placed her hand on his chest, a gesture that was both gentle and firm, a gesture that claimed him and protected him at once. "I'll marry you," Catherine said. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. The words hung in the air, impossible and yet undeniably spoken. Miranda's mouth fell open. "Mother," she said, and her voice was strangled. "What are you doing?" Catherine did not look at her daughter. She kept her eyes on Jacob's face, watching the progression of emotions there. Shock, confusion, disbelief, and then something else, something that might have been hope, struggling to be born. "I'm accepting a proposal of marriage," Catherine said simply. "You rejected Mr. Cole, Miranda. You made it clear that you find him unsuitable, but I do not. I see in him qualities that matter, qualities that you are too young or too foolish to value. He is honest, he is hard-working, he is kind. These are not small things. These are, in fact, everything that matters." She turned her head slightly, finally meeting her daughter's horrified gaze. "You laughed at him, Miranda. You mocked a man for having the courage to offer his heart. That is not behavior I can be proud of, and it is not behavior I will defend." Catherine looked back at Jacob. "I am a widow of 42 years. I have lived enough to know that fine manners and social standing count for very little when measured against character. You have character, Mr. Cole. I have watched you for a year now, seen how you conduct yourself, seen how you treat others when you think no one is paying attention. I would be honored to be your wife, if you will have me." Jacob stared at her as if she had begun speaking in a foreign tongue. His hand, still clutching the ring, had dropped to his side. "Mrs. Hartwell," he managed. "I don't understand. I was asking Miranda." "You were asking the wrong woman," Catherine said gently. "Or perhaps you were asking the right question in the right place, but to the wrong person. I am giving you an honest answer, Mr. Cole. I see your worth. I value what you have to offer. And I believe we might build something good together, if you are willing to try." Around them, the store had erupted into whispered conversation. The story of what had just happened would be all over Cedar Falls within the hour, would be discussed and dissected and debated for weeks to come. But Catherine did not care. She had made her choice in a moment of clarity, and she would stand by it. Jacob looked down at the ring in his hand, then back up at Catherine's face. "You're serious," he said, and it was not quite a question. "I am completely serious," Catherine replied. "But you're a lady. You have a good life here. You have the store, you have respect. I'm just a trapper, I live rough, I don't have much to offer someone like you." "You have yourself to offer," Catherine said. "That is more than enough." She reached out and took the ring from his hand, holding it up to the light. It was simple and honest, like the man who had bought it. She slipped it onto her own finger. It fit nearly perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "There," she said. "That's settled then." Jacob Cole, who had faced down bears and wolves and the brutal indifference of mountain winters, who had survived alone in the wilderness for 12 years, found himself completely undone by this composed woman who had just upended his entire world. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else entirely. His eyes had grown bright, and he blinked rapidly. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "Catherine, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me get to know you properly," Catherine said. "Say we'll take our time with this, and do it right. Say you'll be patient with me while I learn about your world, and you learn about mine." "I can do that," Jacob said, and his voice had steadied. "I can absolutely do that." Catherine smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes and softened her face. "Then we have an understanding, Mr. Cole." "Jacob," he said. "Please call me Jacob." "Jacob," Catherine repeated, testing the name, finding it good. Behind them, Miranda had finally found her voice. "Mother, this is insane. You cannot be serious. You cannot possibly mean to marry this man." Catherine turned to her daughter, and her expression was sad but firm. "I am entirely serious, Miranda. You may not understand my decision now, but perhaps someday you will. In the meantime, I expect you to treat Jacob with respect. He will be my husband, and that makes him family." "Family?" Miranda's voice had risen to nearly a shout. "He's a mountain man. He's beneath us. How can you do this? What will people think?" "People will think what they will think," Catherine said calmly. "I stopped worrying about that some time ago. And as for what Jacob is, he is a good man. That is all that matters to me." She took Jacob's arm, a gesture that was both proprietary and protective. "Now, I believe we have some planning to do. Jacob, would you care to join me for supper this evening? We should discuss the particulars of this arrangement." Jacob nodded, still looking dazed, but beginning to find his footing. "I would like that very much." "Excellent," Catherine said. "Come at 6 o'clock. We'll eat in the rooms above the store, away from prying eyes." She addressed the store at large, her voice carrying authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Please continue with your shopping. Miranda will be happy to assist you." With that, Catherine walked Jacob to the door. She stepped outside with him into the bright morning sun, leaving the stunned and gossiping crowd behind. On the wooden sidewalk she paused and looked up at him. "That was quite an entrance you made," she said, and there was gentle humor in her voice. "I surely did not intend for things to go that way," Jacob said. "I know you didn't, but perhaps it worked out for the best." Catherine squeezed his arm. "Go on now. Come back this evening, and we'll talk properly. There's much we need to learn about each other." Jacob nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped and looked back at her. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you say yes?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "Because you deserved better than what you were receiving. Because I saw something in you worth protecting. And because I realized, standing there watching my daughter destroy you for her own amusement, that I was tired of my own life. Tired of playing it safe, tired of being alone, tired of respectability that brings no joy. You offered something real, Jacob. I decided to accept it." She smiled at him again. "Now go. I have a store to manage and a daughter to deal with. We'll speak tonight." Jacob Cole walked away from the general store that morning with his whole world turned upside down. He had come down from the mountain expecting rejection, and he had received it. But he had also received something he had not even known to hope for. As he made his way back toward the edge of town, He found himself touching the place on his chest where Catherine had placed her hand, as if he could still feel the warmth of it through his shirt. Behind him, in the store, Catherine stood for a long moment in the doorway, watching him go. Then she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her skirts, and turned back to face whatever lay ahead. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the general store, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Catherine moved through her work with practiced efficiency, measuring flour, wrapping purchases in brown paper, making change from the cash box, but her mind was only half on these familiar tasks. The other half was occupied with the extraordinary thing she had done that morning, and with the evening ahead, Miranda had retreated to the back room shortly after Jacob's departure, claiming a headache. Catherine had not pressed her. The confrontation between them would come eventually, but for now she was content to let her daughter sulk in private. The other customers had finally dispersed, taking with them the story that would surely be the talk of every supper table in Cedar Falls that night. Catherine could imagine the conversations, the speculation, the judgments being passed. She found that she did not much care. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, had lingered longer than the others. She was a kind woman, given less to gossip than to genuine concern, and she had approached Catherine near closing time with careful words. "Catherine," she had said quietly, so that only the two of them could hear, "are you certain about what you've done?" "I am," Catherine had replied, meeting the older woman's eyes steadily. "It's just that it was so sudden. And Mr. Cole, he's not..." Mrs. Peterson had paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. "He's not what anyone would have expected for you." "No," Catherine agreed. "He's not what I expected either. But I believe he's what I need." Mrs. Peterson had studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have always been sensible, Catherine. I trust you know your own mind. But if you need someone to talk to, someone to help you think through this decision, you know where to find me." "Thank you," Catherine had said, touched by the genuine care in the offer. "I appreciate that more than you know." Now, as she closed the store for the day, Catherine found herself reflecting on those words. Did she know her own mind? She had acted on instinct that morning, on a sudden clarity that had felt absolutely right in the moment. But now, in the quiet aftermath, doubt began to creep in at the edges. She was 42 years old, set in her ways, comfortable in her routine. Jacob Cole was a mountain man who lived a life completely foreign to her own. What did she really know about him beyond a year's worth of observations made from a distance? What if she had made a terrible mistake? What if her moment of clarity had actually been a moment of madness? Catherine shook her head, banishing these thoughts. She had committed herself to this path, and she would not turn back now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same steady determination that had carried her through widowhood and the running of a business. She had told Jacob they would take their time, get to know each other properly. That was sensible. That was the right approach. She climbed the stairs to the rooms above the store, where she and Miranda had lived since Thomas's death. The space was modest, but comfortable. 3 rooms furnished with good solid pieces that had been built to last. Catherine moved into the kitchen and began preparing the evening meal. She decided on something simple but substantial: a roast chicken with vegetables, fresh bread from the morning's baking, and an apple pie she had made the day before. As she worked, Miranda emerged from her room. Her face was blotched from crying, her eyes red and swollen. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her mother with an expression that mingled hurt and accusation. "How can you act so calm?" Miranda said finally. "How can you just go about making supper as if nothing has happened?" Catherine continued peeling potatoes, her hands steady. "Because supper needs to be made, regardless of what else is going on in our lives. You're really going through with this? You're really going to marry that man?" "His name is Jacob," Catherine said quietly, "and yes, I am going to marry him." "Why?" The word burst from Miranda like something that had been held back too long. Why would you do this to me? Catherine set down the knife and turned to face her daughter fully. To you, Miranda, this decision has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, Miranda shot back. Everyone in town is talking about how my mother accepted a proposal that was meant for me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Do you know what people are saying? I can imagine, Catherine said, and I'm sorry that you're embarrassed. But Miranda, you rejected Jacob cruelly and publicly. You laughed at him. You made him the object of ridicule. What I did was try to salvage something from that situation, to show him that not everyone in this town judges worth by external appearances. So, you're marrying him out of pity? Miranda's voice dripped with scorn. That's even worse. I'm not marrying him out of pity, Catherine said, and she was surprised to find that it was true. She had thought, in the immediate aftermath of her declaration, that compassion had been her primary motivation. But as the day had worn on, as she had had time to think about what she had done and why, she had realized there was more to it than that. I'm marrying him because I want to. Because when I looked at him this morning, I saw something I hadn't seen in a very long time. I saw possibility. Miranda stared at her as if she had started speaking nonsense. Possibility? Mother, he's a mountain man. He lives in a cabin somewhere in the wilderness. What kind of possibility could there possibly be? The possibility of companionship, Catherine said. The possibility of building a life with someone who sees the world differently than I do. The possibility of not being alone anymore. You're not alone. You have me. Yes, Catherine said gently. I have you. And I love you more than anything in this world. But Miranda, you're 19 years old. You're going to leave someday, whether it's to marry or to pursue those dreams of yours about San Francisco. And when you do, I'll be here in these rooms above the store, getting older, getting lonelier, watching life go by from behind a counter. That's not the future I want. Miranda's face had softened slightly, but the anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. You could have married anyone. You could have had your pick of the eligible men in this territory. Why did it have to be him? Because, he asked. Catherine said simply. And because when I looked at him, I didn't see what everyone else sees. I saw a man willing to make himself vulnerable, willing to risk everything for a chance at connection. That takes courage, Miranda. That takes heart. Those are qualities worth more than all the fine manners and social standing in the world. She turned back to her work, picking up the knife and resuming the peeling of potatoes. Jacob will be here at 6 o'clock for supper. I would like you to join us, to be polite and welcoming. Can you do that for me? Miranda was silent for a long moment. Then she said, her voice tight, I don't think I can. I don't think I can sit at the same table with him and pretend that everything is normal. I'm not asking you to pretend, Catherine said. I'm asking you to be civil, to give him a chance, to see what I see in him. I can't, Miranda said. I'm sorry, Mother, but I just can't. She turned and went back to her room, closing the door behind her with a firmness that was just short of a slam. Catherine stood alone in the kitchen, the half-peeled potato in her hand, and felt the weight of what she had set in motion. She had known that Miranda would be upset, but she had not fully anticipated the depth of her daughter's hurt and anger. This rift between them would need healing, but she did not know how to accomplish that healing when she and Miranda had such different views of what mattered in life. She finished preparing the meal, setting the table for 2 instead of 3. As the appointed hour drew near, she changed into one of her better dresses, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair up carefully, studying her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. She looked older than she felt at this moment, the lines around her eyes and mouth marking the passage of years. But she also looked steady, composed, like a woman who knew what she was about. The knock came precisely at 6 o'clock. Catherine opened the door to find Jacob standing on the landing, hat in hand. He, too, had made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, still damp from another washing. His shirt was clean, though she could see where it had been mended in several places. He smelled of soap and pine, and he looked nervous in a way that was oddly endearing. "Good evening, Jacob," Catherine said, stepping back to let him enter. "Please, come in." Jacob stepped through the doorway, his movements careful in the unfamiliar space. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the furnishings, the curtains at the windows, the small touches that made the place a home. He looked like a man entering a world he had observed from a distance but never thought to inhabit. "This is very nice," he said. "Comfortable." "Thank you," Catherine said. "It's modest, but it suits us well enough. Please, sit down. Supper is ready." She had set the table near the window, where the last of the day's light fell across the white cloth. Jacob sat where she indicated, placing his hat carefully on the chair beside him. Catherine served the meal, filling both their plates with food that steamed in the cooling air. For a few minutes, they ate in silence, both of them unsure how to begin the conversation that needed to happen. Finally, Jacob cleared his throat. "I want to thank you," he said, "for what you did today. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Catherine said. "And I think we should be clear about something from the start, Jacob. I didn't say yes out of pity or charity. I said yes because I believe this arrangement could work for both of us." Jacob looked at her directly, his weathered face serious. "You don't know me, though. Not really. You're taking a considerable chance on a man who's practically a stranger." "That's true," Catherine acknowledged. "But I know what I've observed of you over the past year, and I believe character reveals itself in small actions, in how a person conducts themselves when they think no one is watching. I've seen your character, Jacob. I trust what I've seen." "I appreciate that," Jacob said. "But there's things you should know about me, about the life I live. It's not easy, Catherine. The winters are hard in the high country. The cabin is small and rough. There's no society, no neighbors close by. It's solitary, and it's difficult, and I'm not certain it's a life that would suit a woman accustomed to civilization." Catherine set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "Tell me about it," she said. "Tell me about your life, your cabin, what a day looks like for you. I want to understand." And so Jacob began to talk. Slowly at first, hesitantly, but then with growing ease, as Catherine listened without judgment or interruption. He told her about his cabin, built by his own hands from logs he had felled and shaped. He described the clearing where it sat, surrounded by tall pines, with a view of the valley below. He talked about his work, the traplines he maintained, the pelts he harvested, the careful balance required to take from the land without depleting it. He spoke of the solitude, how it had suited him when he first came to the territory, how it had been a refuge from a world that had disappointed him. But he admitted that lately the solitude had begun to feel less like peace and more like loneliness. He talked about the long winter evenings with only his own thoughts for company, the silence that sometimes felt oppressive rather than restful. Catherine listened to all of this, asking questions when clarification was needed, nodding her understanding. When Jacob finally fell silent, having talked more in 1 hour than he typically did in a month, she poured them both coffee and sat back in her chair. "It sounds like a hard life," she said, "but not an impossible one. And you're right that I'm accustomed to different circumstances, but I'm also not afraid of hard work, Jacob. I've been running a business for 4 years. I've dealt with difficult suppliers, demanding customers, lean seasons and good ones. I've managed accounts and inventory and all the small crises that come with keeping a store running. I'm stronger than I might look." "I don't doubt that," Jacob said. "But there's a difference between the kind of work you do and the kind of life I'm describing. Out there, if something goes wrong, if you get hurt or sick, there's no doctor close by. There's no help coming. It's just you and whatever resources you have at hand." "I understand that," Catherine said, "and I won't pretend I'm not concerned about those aspects. But Jacob, I'm also 42 years old. I'm not a young woman looking for adventure or romance. I'm a widow who has learned that security and comfort are not the same as happiness. What you're offering me is a chance at something different, something real. That's worth more than convenience. Jacob studied her across the table, his expression thoughtful. What about the store? He asked. You've built something here. Are you willing to give that up? It was a question Catherine had been turning over in her mind all afternoon. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Miranda could run it, if she were willing, or we could hire someone to manage it, or we could sell it, though that seems like a last resort. But Jacob, I want you to understand something. The store is a business. It's how I make my living, and it's important to me. But it's not who I am. It's not the sum total of my existence. I can let it go if I need to. I wouldn't ask you to give up everything, Jacob said. If we marry, if we try to build a life together, it has to be a partnership. I'm not looking for a servant or someone to just cook and clean for me. I want a companion, someone to share the load with. Maybe there's a way to make both things work, your business and my trapping. Maybe we can figure out something that suits us both. Catherine felt something warm bloom in her chest at those words. This was what she had hoped for, this willingness to adapt, to compromise, to build something together, rather than expecting her to simply slot into his existing life. I think we might manage that, she said softly, if we're both willing to be flexible. They talked on into the evening, the light fading outside the windows, the candles Catherine lit casting warm shadows around the room. They spoke of practical matters, of timelines and logistics, of how to navigate the disapproval they would surely face. They spoke of their pasts, of the losses they had endured, of the hopes they still carried, and slowly, tentatively, they began to build the foundation of something that might, with time and effort, become genuine affection. It was past 9 when Jacob finally rose to leave. Catherine walked him to the door, and they stood there for a moment, the evening air cool against their faces. "Thank you for supper," Jacob said. "And for the conversation. I feel like I know you better now." "I feel the same," Catherine said. "When will I see you again?" "I should go back to my cabin for a few days, check the trap lines, make sure everything is secure. But I could come back to town on Thursday, if that suits you." "Thursday is fine," Catherine said. "Come for supper again. And Jacob, in the meantime, I want you to think about what you really want from this marriage. Be honest with yourself about what you're hoping for, what you're willing to offer. We both need to go into this with clear eyes." Jacob nodded. "I will. And Catherine, you do the same. Make sure this is really what you want. Don't do this just because you said you would. If you change your mind, I'll understand." "I won't change my mind," Catherine said with quiet certainty. "But I appreciate you giving me the option." She watched him descend the stairs and disappear into the darkness of the street below. Then she closed the door and turned back to her quiet rooms, where Miranda's closed door was a silent accusation and the remains of supper still sat on the table. Catherine cleaned up the dishes, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind replayed the evening's conversation. She felt cautiously hopeful, more so than she had expected. Jacob Cole was a thoughtful man, a careful man, someone who considered consequences and asked questions. These were good qualities in a husband. These were qualities she could build a life around. In her room, lying in bed with the sounds of the town settling into sleep around her, Catherine thought about the future she had chosen. It would be different from anything she had imagined for herself. It would be challenging and uncertain, and probably difficult in ways she could not yet anticipate. But it would also be hers, a choice she had made for herself rather than a path that had been chosen for her. She thought about Jacob in his mountain cabin, wondered if he too was lying awake, thinking about what they had begun. She hoped he was not having regrets, not wishing he could take back his proposal now that it had been accepted by the wrong woman. but she did not think he was that kind of man. He had seemed genuinely pleased by the evening, genuinely interested in making this work. In the next room, Miranda lay awake as well, her mind churning with anger and confusion and a hurt she could not quite name. She felt betrayed by her mother, embarrassed by the whole situation, and deeply uncertain about what would happen now. How could her mother do this? How could she throw away her respectable life for a mountain man who had nothing to offer? It made no sense, and yet it was happening, and Miranda could not see any way to stop it. She thought about Jacob Cole's face when she had laughed at him, the way the color had drained from his features, the hurt in his eyes. For just a moment she felt a flicker of guilt. Had she been cruel? Perhaps. But he had been presumptuous, asking for something so far above his station he had deserved to be put in his place. And yet her mother had seen something different. Her mother had looked at the same man and seen someone worth defending, worth marrying. Miranda could not understand it. She wondered if her mother had lost her senses, if widowhood and loneliness had made her desperate enough to accept anything, anyone who offered companionship. She turned over in bed, pulling the blankets up around her shoulders. Tomorrow the talk would be even worse. Tomorrow everyone would have opinions, judgments, advice. Miranda dreaded it, dreaded having to defend her mother's inexplicable choice, dreaded the knowing looks and whispered conversations. She wished she could simply disappear, go somewhere far away where no one knew about this humiliating situation, but there was nowhere to go, no escape offered to her. She was stuck in Cedar Falls, stuck in the rooms above the general store, stuck watching her mother make what Miranda was certain was the worst mistake of her life. All she could do was wait and hope that her mother would come to her senses before it was too late. In the darkness of 3 separate places, 3 people lay awake with their thoughts, each one processing the extraordinary events of the day, each one uncertain of what the morning would bring. The town slept around them, but in their minds the conversations continued, the doubts multiplied, and the future remained stubbornly unclear. Jacob helped Catherine with her bags, carrying them into the cabin while she followed, stepping over the threshold into her new life. The interior was dim after the brightness outside, and Catherine paused to let her eyes adjust. As shapes resolved into clarity, she took in the space that would be her home for at least part of each year. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth well swept and a fire burning low behind the grate. A sturdy table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the space. Against the far wall stood a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and beside it a tall cupboard that likely held supplies. The bed was in the loft, she could see, and there were pegs on the walls for hanging clothes and equipment. Everything was clean, orderly, spare but not uncomfortable. "I know it's not what you're used to," Jacob said, watching her face carefully. "It's honest," Catherine replied, running her hand along the smooth surface of the table. "Everything here serves a purpose. There's no pretension, no waste. I think I could grow to love that." She saw relief flood Jacob's features. He set her bags down near the cupboard and moved to build up the fire. "I've got stew cooking," he said. "Nothing fancy, just venison and vegetables. Figured you'd be hungry after the ride." "I am," Catherine admitted. She was also exhausted, overwhelmed, and feeling the first stirrings of uncertainty about what she had done. But she pushed those feelings down, determined not to let them show. She had made this choice freely, and she would not burden Jacob with regrets on their first evening as husband and wife. They ate the simple meal at the table, and Catherine found the stew was better than Jacob's modest description suggested. The venison was tender, well seasoned with herbs she did not recognize, and the vegetables were fresh and flavorful. They talked little during the meal, both of them tired from the day's events and the journey, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people growing accustomed to sharing space, learning the rhythms of each other's presence. After supper, Jacob showed Catherine where things were kept, how the stove worked, where he stored water, and how often it needed to be fetched. From the spring, he explained his routines, the patterns of his days, the work that would need doing. Catherine listened carefully, committing it all to memory, understanding that she would need to learn these practical matters quickly if she was to be a partner rather than a burden. As night deepened and the fire burned lower, the question that had been hovering unspoken between them finally demanded acknowledgement. They were married now, legally and in the eyes of God and the community. Certain expectations came with that state. But they were also two people who barely knew each other, who had entered into this arrangement more out of practical considerations than passionate desire. Jacob cleared his throat. "Catherine," he began, then paused, searching for words. "I want you to know that I don't expect anything tonight, or any night, until you're ready. We may be married, but we're still strangers in many ways. I'm content to let things develop naturally, at a pace that feels right, to both of us." Catherine felt a wave of gratitude for his consideration. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate that more than I can say. I'm not opposed to the physical aspects of marriage, Jacob, but I would like us to grow into that part of our relationship rather than rushing into it." "That suits me fine," Jacob said. "I've set up the loft for you, fresh linens and everything. I can sleep down here by the fire. The nights are still cool enough that it's comfortable. Are you certain? I don't want to put you out of your own bed." "I'm certain," Jacob said firmly. "You need your rest, and you need your privacy. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Catherine climbed the ladder to the loft, finding it exactly as Jacob had described. The bed was narrow but sturdy, made up with clean sheets and a thick quilt. There was a small window that looked out over the clearing, and through it she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. She changed into her nightgown, grateful for the privacy the loft afforded, and lay down between the unfamiliar sheets. Below, she could hear Jacob moving about, banking the fire, making his own preparations for sleep. The sounds were domestic, comforting in their normalcy. Catherine lay awake for a long time, adjusting to the different quality of darkness here in the mountains, to the sounds of wind in the trees and the occasional call of a night bird. It was so different from the town, from the creaking of the store below and the distant sounds of people going about their evening business. She thought about Miranda, wondered if her daughter was also lying awake, thinking about how the day had changed everything. She hoped Miranda was not too angry, not too hurt. But mostly she hoped her daughter was safe, and that someday they might find their way back to each other. She thought about the life she had left behind, the comfortable routines, the familiar faces, the security of knowing exactly what each day would bring. She had given up a great deal to be here. But she had also gained something, though she was not yet certain what that something was. Possibility, perhaps. The chance to discover who she might become when removed from the constraints of expectation and reputation. Finally, exhausted by the long day and the emotional weight of it all, Catherine drifted into sleep. Her dreams were confused, fragments of old life and new, of Miranda's angry face and Jacob's gentle hands, of the store's familiar shelves and the unfamiliar darkness of mountain nights. She woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee brewing below. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to place where she was, or why. Then memory returned, and with it a complex mixture of feelings she could not quite sort through. She was married. She was in a cabin in the mountains. Her old life was miles away, and her new life was just beginning. Catherine dressed and descended the ladder to find Jacob already up and moving about. He had breakfast cooking, simple fare of eggs and bread, and he greeted her with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole," he said. "Good morning," Catherine replied. The name sounded strange to her ears, but she supposed she would grow accustomed to it in time. They ate breakfast together, and afterward Jacob said, "I thought I'd show you around today, let you get familiar with the place, see where things are. Tomorrow I'll need to check the trap lines, make sure nothing's been disturbed while I was gone. But today is for settling in." They spent the morning exploring the immediate area around the cabin. Jacob showed her the spring where he drew water, a clear pool fed by a trickle from higher up the mountain. He showed her the garden plot and explained what he had planted, mostly root vegetables and herbs that could withstand the short growing season. He took her to the barn, where Sage and his other horse, a gelding named Flint, were stabled. He pointed out the markers he had set for his trap lines, explained which territories he worked and which belonged to other trappers by informal agreement. Catherine absorbed all of this information, asking questions when something was unclear, offering observations when they seemed appropriate. She was learning not just the practical details of mountain life, but also something about Jacob himself. She saw how carefully he tended his land, how much thought he had put into the placement of every structure and path. This was not a man who did things haphazardly. This was someone who planned, who thought ahead, who took responsibility seriously. In the afternoon, Jacob worked on repairs to the barn roof, while Catherine began organizing the cabin interior to better suit shared occupancy. She moved things around, creating spaces for her belongings, rearranging the cupboard to make room for the supplies she had brought. She set out the items Jacob had made for her, the carved spoons and candle holders and mirror, finding places for them that felt right. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the conversation they had had weeks ago, about expanding beyond mere subsistence, about building something substantial. She could see possibilities here that perhaps Jacob had not yet imagined. The land could support more than just a trapper's minimal existence. There was timber, as he had mentioned, and she wondered about the market for quality lumber. There was the garden, which could be expanded to produce surplus for sale in town. There were the crafts Jacob made, beautiful pieces that could command good prices if properly marketed. But these were thoughts for later, she told herself. First, she needed to master the basics of this new life, to prove she could manage the fundamental challenges before worrying about expansion and growth. She needed to earn her place here, to become a genuine partner rather than a dependent spouse. That evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sun set behind the western peaks, Catherine felt the first stirrings of something that might, with time and care, become contentment. The air was cool and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers. The silence was profound but not oppressive, broken only by natural sounds that felt soothing rather than alarming. Jacob sat beside her on the bench he had built, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. "What are you thinking?" he asked after a while. "That this is very different from what I expected," Catherine said honestly. "But not in a bad way, just different." "Different how?" "Quieter, more peaceful. In town, there's always noise, always people wanting something, always the next task demanding attention. Here, there's space to think, space to breathe. I didn't realize how much I needed that until I experienced it." Jacob nodded. "That's what drew me to the mountains in the first place. The space, the chance to hear my own thoughts without all the clutter of civilization drowning them out. Do you ever get lonely?" Catherine asked. "Or did you, before?" "Sometimes," Jacob admitted. "Especially in the deep winter, when the snow is too heavy to make the trip to town, and it's just me and the silence for weeks on end. That's when I'd start talking to the horses, having full conversations with them like they could answer back." He laughed, a little embarrassed. "Probably sounds crazy." "It doesn't sound crazy at all," Catherine said. "It sounds human. We're social creatures, most of us. We need connection, even when we value solitude." "What about you?" Jacob asked. "Do you think you'll get lonely up here?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "I might," she said. "But I think I was lonely in town too, just in a different way. Surrounded by people but not truly connected to any of them, not in any meaningful sense. At least here, if I'm lonely, I'll have you. That's more than I had before." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, brilliant against the darkening sky. Catherine had never seen stars like this, so many and so bright, undimmed by the lights of civilization. It was beautiful and humbling, a reminder of how vast the world was and how small their place in it. Over the following days, they settled into a routine. Jacob taught Catherine the skills she would need, showing her how to maintain the fire properly, how to preserve food, how to recognize the signs of changing weather in the mountains. Catherine proved to be a quick study, her practical nature serving her well in this environment where mistakes could have serious consequences. She learned to fetch water from the spring without spilling, to bake bread in the cabin's small oven, to mend clothes with the efficiency required when new garments were difficult to obtain. Jacob, in turn, began to appreciate qualities in Catherine that he had not fully recognized before. Her steady competence, her lack of complaint about the rough conditions, her genuine interest in learning rather than merely enduring. She did not try to change his cabin into something it was not, but she did add small touches that made it feel more like a home. Curtains at the window, flowers in a jar on the table, the space organized in ways that made daily life smoother. They talked more as the days passed, long conversations in the evenings when the work was done, and they sat together by the fire. Catherine told Jacob about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her parents who had struggled financially and seen her marriage to Thomas as salvation. She spoke of her early years with Thomas, the adjustment to frontier life, the loneliness of being far from everything she had known. She talked about Miranda as a child, the joy of motherhood mixed with the challenges of raising a daughter alone after Thomas died. Jacob shared his own history in greater detail. He spoke of his parents, hard-working farmers who had given him a solid foundation but little in the way of material inheritance. He talked about his decision to go west, the years of learning mountain craft, the mistakes he had made and the lessons they had taught him. He admitted that he had never expected to marry, had assumed his life would be lived in solitude until age or accident ended it. "What made you decide to propose?" Catherine asked one evening. "To Miranda, I mean. What made you think that was what you wanted?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I think I was tired," he said finally. "Tired of being alone, tired of having no one to share things with. And Miranda, she represented something I'd convinced myself I wanted. Youth, beauty, the promise of a different kind of life. But I was fooling myself, Catherine. I didn't really want Miranda. I wanted the idea of her, the fantasy. What I actually needed was something real, something grounded. I just didn't know that until you said yes." "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "How it all happened?" "No," Jacob said without hesitation. "I won't lie and say I wasn't embarrassed that day in the store, or that Miranda's rejection didn't sting. But if she had said yes, I'd be married to the wrong woman right now. I'd be trying to build a life with someone who didn't want this life, who wouldn't have been happy here. You, though, you're different. You understand what this is, what it requires, and you're willing to do the work. That's worth more than all the beauty in the world." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I'm glad you think so," she said, "because I feel the same way. This is work, being here, learning all of this. But it's work that matters. Work that's building towards something real. That's what I was missing in my old life, the sense that what I was doing mattered beyond just getting through another day." As the second week in the mountains drew to a close, Catherine began to notice changes in herself. Her hands, accustomed to the relatively light work of managing a store, were developing calluses from hauling water and chopping vegetables and helping Jacob with various chores. Her skin had taken on color from spending time outdoors. She felt stronger, more capable, more present in her own body than she had in years. She also noticed changes in her relationship with Jacob. The careful distance they had maintained initially was gradually diminishing. They stood closer to each other naturally now. Their conversations had deepened, moving beyond surface topics to matters of genuine importance. They had begun to develop small rituals: morning coffee drunk together in companionable silence, evening walks around the clearing before bed, shared laughter over small incidents that would have meant nothing to anyone else but had become private jokes between them. One afternoon, as Catherine was working in the garden and Jacob was splitting wood nearby, she looked up and caught him watching her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of growing attachment that neither was quite ready to name. Jacob smiled, and Catherine smiled back, and then they both returned to their work. But something had shifted, some barrier had thinned, and they both felt it. That night, as Catherine was preparing to climb to the loft, Jacob said, "Catherine, I've been thinking about the sleeping arrangements." Catherine paused, her hand on the ladder. "Yes, I'm not suggesting anything improper," Jacob said quickly. "But I was thinking that maybe, if you're comfortable with it, we could try sharing the loft. There's room enough for both of us if we're practical about it, and it seems foolish for me to sleep down here when we're married and the nights are getting colder." Catherine considered this. They had been married for 2 weeks now, and while they had not yet been intimate in the full sense, there had been increasing physical comfort between them. A hand on a shoulder, fingers touching briefly as they passed something between them, the casual proximity of two people learning to share space. Perhaps it was time to take the next step, to begin building the deeper partnership they had both said they wanted. "I think that would be fine," she said. "If you're certain it's what you want." "I'm certain," Jacob said. "But Catherine, I want to be clear. I'm still not expecting anything more than sleep. I meant what I said about letting things develop naturally. This is just about not being separated by the length of the cabin every night." "I understand," Catherine said. "And I appreciate your patience. I do want that aspect of our marriage eventually, Jacob. I'm just not quite ready yet." "Take all the time you need," Jacob assured her. "There's no rush." That night, they lay together in the narrow bed, carefully maintaining space between them, but aware of each other's presence in a new and more intimate way. Catherine could hear Jacob's breathing, could feel the warmth of his body near hers. It was strange and new, but not uncomfortable. She felt safe here, she realized. Safe in a way she had not felt since she was a child in her parents' house, before life had taught her to be constantly vigilant, constantly performing. In the darkness, Jacob's voice came soft and tentative. "Catherine?" "Yes?" "Thank you for all of this, for taking a chance on me, for being here, for trying to make this work. It means more than I can properly express." Catherine reached out in the darkness and found his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, "for looking past the surface and recognizing that I was worth knowing. That means everything." They lay there holding hands across the space between them, and Catherine thought that this was perhaps more intimate than any physical joining could have been at this stage. This was two people choosing each other again, consciously and deliberately, not in the heat of passion or the pressure of a public moment, but in the quiet darkness where truth lived. She fell asleep that way, her hand in Jacob's, and slept more soundly than she had since coming to the mountain. The 3rd week brought the first real test of their partnership. Catherine woke one morning to find Jacob already dressed and preparing supplies with unusual care. He was loading his pack with rope, traps, tools, and provisions that suggested he would be gone for more than a few hours. "I need to check the far trap lines," he explained when he saw Catherine watching from the loft. "It's a full day's work, maybe longer. I'll be gone until tomorrow evening at the earliest. Will you be all right here alone?" Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety but pushed it down. She had known this would come eventually. Jacob's work required him to range far from the cabin, and she could not expect him to take her along every time, especially when she was still learning the basics of mountain life. "I'll be fine," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Just tell me what needs doing while you're gone." Jacob went through the list: maintain the fire, tend the garden, water the horses, keep the doors barred at night. He showed her where he kept his rifle and reminded her how to load and fire it, though he assured her she was unlikely to need it. Most animals would avoid the cabin, and other trappers respected territorial boundaries. "If anything happens, anything at all that worries you, fire 3 shots in quick succession," he said. "There's other trappers within earshot. They'll come check on you." "I'll be fine," Catherine repeated, and this time she meant it. She had managed a business, raised a daughter, survived widowhood. She could certainly manage a day and night alone in a cabin. Jacob left shortly after dawn, and Catherine watched him disappear into the trees with his pack on his back and his rifle slung over his shoulder. Then she turned to face her first day of true solitude in the mountains. She went about her tasks methodically, finding comfort in routine. She fed and watered the horses, speaking to them softly as Jacob did, finding their presence reassuring. She worked in the garden, pulling weeds and checking the progress of the vegetables. She brought in water from the spring, made herself breakfast, tidied the cabin. The hours passed slowly, but not unpleasantly. It was in the afternoon, as Catherine was sitting outside the cabin mending one of Jacob's shirts, that she heard the sound of someone approaching. Her first instinct was alarm, but then she remembered that Jacob had mentioned other trappers in the area, men who occasionally passed through or stopped to trade information about game and weather. The man who emerged from the trees was older than Jacob, perhaps 60, with a grey beard that reached his chest and eyes that were sharp and assessing. He stopped at the edge of the thyme, clearing, making no move to approach closer without invitation. "Afternoon," he called. "Name's Henry Bridger. I trap the territory east of here. Jacob Cole around." Catherine stood, setting aside her mending. "He's checking his far lines. He'll be back tomorrow evening. I'm Catherine, Jacob's wife." Henry's eyebrows rose. "Wife? Well, I'll be. Heard rumors in town that Jacob had gotten himself married, but I didn't quite credit them. No offense, ma'am, but Jacob never struck me as the marrying type." "None taken," Catherine said. "It was somewhat unexpected for both of us. Would you like some coffee? I've got a pot on." Henry accepted the invitation, tying his horse near the barn before approaching the cabin. Catherine poured coffee for both of them, and they sat on the bench outside, the older man studying her with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the widow from town," he said finally. "The one with the store." "That's right. Took some courage, coming up here. Mountain life's not easy for folks used to civilization. So I'm discovering," Catherine said, "but I'm learning. Jacob's been patient with me." "Jacob's a good man," Henry said. "Known him near about 12 years now. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair in his dealings, and he knows the mountains better than most." "You could have done worse." "I believe I've done quite well," Catherine said with quiet firmness. Henry chuckled. "Got some spine to you. That's good. You'll need it up here." He sipped his coffee, then said, "I came by to warn Jacob, actually. Thought I'd leave him a message, but since you're here, I'll tell you direct. There's been bear sign east of here, a big male by the looks of it. He's been getting into trap lines, making a nuisance of himself. Jacob should keep an eye out, maybe bring his traps in closer for a few weeks until the bear moves on." Catherine felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "Is there danger? To Jacob, I mean?" "There's always some danger," Henry said, honestly. "But Jacob knows how to handle himself around bears. Just wanted him to be aware is all. You tell him when he gets back, all right?" "I will," Catherine promised. Henry finished his coffee and stood to leave. "You need anything, ma'am. My cabin's about 4 miles east, straight along the ridge trail. Don't hesitate to come find me if there's trouble." After he left, Catherine found herself more unsettled than she wanted to admit. The mention of a bear, the reminder that Jacob's work carried real dangers, the awareness that she was truly alone here, with night approaching. She went back to her mending, but her hands were not quite steady. As evening came on, Catherine prepared a simple supper and ate it alone at the table. The cabin felt larger somehow without Jacob's presence, the shadows deeper, the silence more profound. She told herself she was being foolish, that nothing had changed from the morning when she had felt perfectly confident. But fear was not always rational, and the darkness pressing against the windows seemed full of unnamed threats. She checked the door bar twice, made sure the windows were secure, added wood to the fire, perhaps more often than necessary. She tried to read from one of the books Jacob kept on a shelf, but she could not concentrate on the words. Every sound outside, every creak of the cabin settling, every whisper of wind in the pines made her tense and alert. When she finally climbed to the loft, Catherine lay awake for a long time, acutely aware of the empty space beside her where Jacob should have been. She missed him. She realized with some surprise, not just his presence as security against potential dangers, but him specifically, his steady breathing, the warmth of his body, the comfort of knowing she was not alone. When had that happened? When had this arrangement of convenience become something that mattered emotionally? She must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke suddenly, in the deep hours of night, to a sound outside, something large moving through the clearing, something that snapped branches and made the horses whinny nervously in the barn. Catherine's heart hammered as she climbed down from the loft as quietly as she could. She found the rifle where Jacob had shown her, loaded it with trembling hands, and positioned herself near the window where she could see out without being seen. The moon was nearly full, casting silvered light across the clearing. In that light, Catherine saw it. A bear, massive and dark, moving along the edge of the tree line. It paused near the garden, sniffing the air, then moved toward the barn. The horses were making more noise now, frightened by the predator's proximity. Catherine's mind raced. She remembered Jacob's instructions about firing 3 shots to summon help, but she also remembered Henry's words about the bear being a nuisance in the area. Perhaps if she made noise, scared it off, it would leave without causing real damage. Jacob had told her most animals would avoid human presence if given the chance. She opened the cabin door carefully, staying in the doorway where she had shelter to retreat to if needed. She raised the rifle and fired a single shot into the air. The sound was enormous in the mountain quiet, and the bear startled, turning toward the cabin. For a moment it stood on its hind legs, massive and terrifying in the moonlight. Catherine's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. But then the bear dropped to all fours and lumbered away into the trees, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Catherine stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding, waiting to see if it would return. Long minutes passed. The horses settled. The night returned to its normal sounds. Finally, Catherine stepped back inside, barred the door again, and sank down onto one of the chairs, the rifle across her lap. She had done it. She had faced a real danger and handled it. Not perfectly, perhaps not even wisely, but she had not panicked, had not frozen, had not failed. As her fear gradually subsided, Catherine felt something else rise to take its place, a sense of capability, of strength she had not known she possessed. She had survived this night alone, and if she could survive this, she could survive whatever else the mountain threw at her. She did not sleep again that night. But she no longer felt afraid. She sat by the fire as the darkness slowly gave way to dawn, thinking about what had happened and what it meant. She thought about Miranda, who had believed her mother was making a terrible mistake. She thought about the townspeople who had been certain she could not adapt to this harsh life. She thought about her own doubts, the moments when she had wondered if she had been foolish to leave the comfortable security of her old life. And she thought that perhaps they had all underestimated her, including herself. She was stronger than she had known, more capable, more resilient. The mountain was teaching her things about herself that she could never have learned in the safe confines of Cedar Falls. Jacob returned late the following afternoon, tired and dusty from his journey. Catherine met him outside the cabin, and he smiled when he saw her, a genuine expression of pleasure at homecoming. "Everything all right?" he asked, taking in her face with concern. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. Much," Catherine admitted. "We had a visitor last night." The bear Henry Bridger warned about. It came into the clearing, got close to the barn. I fired a shot to scare it off, and it worked. But I was too keyed up to sleep after that. Jacob's expression shifted to alarm. You saw the bear? Catherine, that's dangerous. You should have fired the 3 shots, gotten help. I handled it, Catherine said, and there was steel in her voice. I was frightened. Yes, but I thought through my options and took appropriate action. The bear left, the horses are fine, and I'm fine. I'm not helpless, Jacob. I need you to know that. Jacob studied her face, and Catherine saw the moment when his concern shifted to something else. Respect, perhaps. Understanding. I can see that, he said quietly. I'm sorry for doubting you. You did well, Catherine. Better than well. You did exactly right. Henry came by yesterday, Catherine said, relaxing now that Jacob was not going to treat her like a fragile thing that needed protection. He told me about the bear, warned that you should bring your trap lines in closer until it moves on. I'll do that, Jacob said. Starting tomorrow. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing gently. I'm glad you're safe, and I'm glad you were here, taking care of things. I came back to a home, not just a cabin. That's because of you. That evening, as they prepared supper together, Catherine told Jacob the full story of her encounter with the bear, and he listened with attention that showed he was taking her seriously, not dismissing her experience or her handling of it. They talked about what precautions to take going forward, and Jacob listened to Catherine's suggestions as if they had equal weight to his own more experienced opinions. Later, as they lay together in the loft, Jacob said, I was thinking about what you said weeks ago, about building something substantial, not just surviving but thriving. I think you're right, Catherine. I think we could do more with this land, more with our lives. I've been content with bare sufficiency for so long that I stopped seeing possibilities. But you see them, and that makes me see them too. What kind of possibilities are you thinking about? Catherine asked. Timber, for one thing. There's good trees on my land, and the market in town is strong. We could cut selectively, maintain the forest, while also producing income. Your garden is doing well. Next year we could expand it, grow surplus to sell. And there's the crafts I make. You mentioned once that they could be marketed. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's ways to turn all of this into something more than just getting by. Catherine felt excitement stir in her chest. This was the Jacob she had glimpsed during their courtship, the man who could think beyond immediate survival to longer-term goals. We'd need to plan carefully, she said. Figure out investments and returns, balance the work against the potential profit. But yes, I think we could do it. I think we could build something real here. They talked late into the night, making plans, considering options, building a vision of a future that was more than either of them had imagined separately. And as Catherine finally drifted towards sleep, she thought that this was what partnership truly meant. Not just sharing space and chores, but sharing dreams, combining strengths, creating something together that neither could have created alone. The 4th week in the mountains brought a rhythm to their days that felt almost natural. Catherine had adapted to the physical demands of mountain life, her body growing stronger, her skills more certain. She could now manage most of the daily tasks without Jacob's guidance, could make decisions about what needed doing and when. The cabin had truly become her home, not just a place she was staying. Her relationship with Jacob had deepened as well, moving beyond careful courtesy into genuine affection. They had developed patterns of interaction that felt comfortable and right. Morning coffee shared in quiet companionship. Midday work done, sometimes together, sometimes separately, but always with awareness of each other's presence. Evenings spent in conversation, planning, or simply sitting together watching the changing light on the mountains. The physical distance between them had gradually diminished until it no longer existed. They slept close now, often waking in the morning to find they had drawn together in the night. They touched casually throughout the day. A hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed tools or dishes, the easy physical comfort of two people growing accustomed to sharing space and lives. One evening, as they sat together after supper, Jacob said, "I need to go down to town in the next few days, check on supplies, sell some furs, see about arranging timber contracts. I thought you might want to come with me, check on the store, visit with Mrs. Brennan, maybe see Miranda." Catherine felt her chest tighten at the mention of her daughter. She had been trying not to think too much about Miranda, to give both of them space to process what had happened. But she missed her daughter with an ache that never quite went away, and the thought of seeing her again filled Catherine with both hope and dread. "I'd like that," she said, "though I'm not certain Miranda will want to see me." "Maybe not," Jacob acknowledged, "but you won't know unless you try. And regardless of how that goes, it would be good for you to check on the store, make sure everything's running smooth." They left 2 days later, making the journey to Cedar Falls in good time. Catherine found herself viewing the town with new eyes after her weeks in the mountains. It seemed crowded now, noisy, the buildings too close together, and the air thick with the smells of civilization. She had not realized how much she had changed until she saw her old life from this new perspective. They stopped first at the store. Mrs. Brennan greeted them warmly, and Catherine could see immediately that the business was in good hands. The shelves were well stocked, the accounts were in order, and Mrs. Brennan had even implemented a few small improvements that Catherine had to admit were sensible. They spent an hour going over the books, discussing supplier relationships, making plans for the coming months. "You've done excellent work," Catherine told Mrs. Brennan. "I'm grateful to have someone so capable managing things." "It's been my pleasure," Mrs. Brennan said. "And Mrs. Cole, if I may say so, you look well. Mountain life seems to agree with you." Catherine realized with some surprise that it was true. She felt better than she had in years, stronger and more vital, more present in her own life. "It does," she said simply. When she asked about Miranda, Mrs. Brennan's expression became more guarded. "She's been managing," she said carefully, "working hard, keeping to herself mostly. She hasn't been unkind to me, but she hasn't been warm either. I think she's struggling with everything that's happened." "Is she here now?" Catherine asked. "She's in the back receiving a delivery. Would you like me to get her?" Catherine hesitated, then nodded. A few minutes later, Miranda emerged from the storeroom. When she saw her mother, she stopped abruptly, her face going through a series of expressions too quick to read. Finally, it settled into careful neutrality. "Hello, Mother," she said. "Hello, Miranda," Catherine replied. "You look well." "So do." Miranda's eyes moved to Jacob, who stood near the door, giving them space. "Mr. Cole." "Miss Miranda," Jacob said with a polite nod. An awkward silence fell. Catherine searched for words that might bridge the distance between them, but could not find them. Finally, she said, "I was wondering if you might join me for supper tonight. Above the store, just the two of us. I'd like to talk, if you're willing." Miranda's jaw tightened, but after a moment she nodded. "All right. What time? 6 o'clock? I'll be there." Catherine and Jacob left the store and spent the rest of the afternoon seeing to other business. Jacob arranged meetings with timber buyers, Catherine ordered supplies to be sent up to the cabin, and they both endured the curious stares and whispered comments that their presence in town generated. By late afternoon, Catherine was exhausted from the effort of maintaining composure under constant scrutiny. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Jacob asked as 6 o'clock approached. "I could come with you, if you want the support." "No," Catherine said. "This needs to be just Miranda and me, but thank you for offering." She climbed the stairs to the rooms above the store with a heart that beat too fast and hands that trembled slightly. The space looked exactly as she had left it, but it felt different now, like a place from her past rather than her present. She prepared a simple meal, set the table, and waited. Miranda arrived precisely at 6. She sat at the table without preamble, and Catherine served the food. They ate in silence for several minutes before Catherine finally found the courage to speak. "I know you're angry with me," she began, "and I understand why. I'm not here to defend myself or to ask you to approve of my choices. I just want you to know that I love you, Miranda. That has never changed and will never change." Miranda set down her fork with careful precision. "You left me," she said, and her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "You married a man you barely knew and you left me alone." "I didn't leave you alone," Catherine said gently. "You're 19 years old, Miranda. You're a grown woman, capable and strong. And I didn't abandon you. The store is yours. The security it provides is yours. I've given you everything I can to ensure your future." "I don't want the store," Miranda said, and tears had begun to slip down her cheeks. "I want my mother. I want things to be the way they were." Catherine felt her own throat tighten. "Things can never be exactly as they were. Life doesn't work that way. But Miranda, I'm still your mother. That relationship doesn't end just because I've married. I'm still here, still available to you, still loving you with everything I have." "It's not the same," Miranda insisted. "Everything's different now." "You're different." "Yes," Catherine admitted. "I am different. I'm happier, Miranda. I'm more myself than I've been in years. Does that really matter less than maintaining a comfortable routine?" Miranda wiped at her tears angrily. "Tell me about him," she said abruptly. "About Jacob. Tell me what you see in him that made you willing to give up everything." Catherine thought carefully about how to answer. "He's a good man," she said finally. "Kind, thoughtful, hard-working. He treats me with respect and genuine care. We're building something together, Miranda, a real partnership based on honesty and shared goals. That's more valuable than all the social standing or comfortable security in the world." "Do you love him?" Miranda asked. Catherine paused, considering the question honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "What I feel for Jacob is different from what I felt for your father. It's growing, developing, becoming something deeper with each passing day. Whether that will become what people call love, I can't say for certain. But I care for him, Miranda. I care for him deeply, and I believe that what we have is real and worth protecting." Miranda was quiet for a long time, staring at her plate. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "I was so cruel to him that day. When he proposed, I laughed at him, Mother. I made him feel worthless." "Yes," Catherine said, "you did." "I've thought about that a lot," Miranda admitted. "About how his face looked, how he just stood there taking it. I've wondered if maybe I was wrong about him, if maybe there was more to see than I bothered looking for." "There was," Catherine said. "And there is. But Miranda, you were not entirely wrong to refuse him. You and Jacob would not have been a good match. You want different things from life, value different things. His proposal to you was based on an illusion, a fantasy that had little to do with who you actually are. What Jacob and I have is based on reality, on actually knowing and understanding each other. That's why it works." "I still don't understand how you could just decide to marry him like that," Miranda said, in a moment, without thinking it through. "I had been thinking it through," Catherine said. "Not consciously, perhaps, but I'd been observing Jacob for a year. I'd been feeling the weight of loneliness, the sense that my life was becoming smaller rather than larger. When he proposed, and you rejected him, something became very clear to me. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. Sometimes the best decisions we make are the ones we make quickly, from instinct rather than prolonged deliberation." They talked for another hour, not resolving everything, but at least beginning to rebuild the bridge between them. Miranda asked questions about life in the mountains, and Catherine answered honestly, not hiding the difficulties, but also sharing the unexpected joys. She told Miranda about the bear, about learning to ride again, about the plans she and Jacob were making for the future. When Miranda finally left, she paused at the door. "I'm still angry," she said. "I'm still hurt. But, Mother, I'm also glad you're happy. I don't fully understand it, and I'm not ready to embrace it, but I can see that you're different now. Better, in some ways. That matters. Thank you, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. After Miranda had gone, Catherine sat alone in the quiet rooms and allowed herself to cry. Tears of grief for the relationship that had been damaged, tears of hope for the relationship that might yet be rebuilt, tears of gratitude that her daughter had at least been willing to talk. She sat there until Jacob came to find her, and when he did, she went into his arms and let him hold her while she composed herself. "How did it go?" he asked. "Not perfectly," Catherine said, "but better than I feared. She's still angry, still hurt, but she's also beginning to understand, I think, or at least trying to." "That's something," Jacob said. "That's a start." They spent the night in the rooms above the store. In the bed Catherine had slept in as Thomas's wife, and then as a widow. It felt strange to be there with Jacob, to have these two parts of her life collide. But it also felt right, as if she were bringing her past and present into alignment, acknowledging that she was both the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. In the morning, they prepared to return to the mountains. Catherine took a last look around the store, said goodbye to Mrs. Brennan, and made a point of seeking out Miranda to say farewell. Her daughter was stiff but not cold, and when Catherine hugged her, Miranda hugged back, briefly but genuinely. "Come visit sometime," Catherine said. "When you're ready, I'd like you to see the cabin, see the life I'm building." "Maybe," Miranda said. "Someday." It was enough. Catherine rode out of Cedar Falls beside her husband, heading back toward the mountains that had become home, carrying with her a lighter heart than she had brought to town. The rift with Miranda was not healed, but it was no longer festering. There was hope now, and hope was precious.